Welcome back to the channel. I'm honored to share this interview slash conversation with you. In this video, I sit down with my teacher Gideon, and he talks about his experience exploring the internal arts of yoga, Qigong, and Tai Chi for over 3 decades. This experience includes a lot of time spent in Asia with masters in China and India. And what I love about this conversation is I think really anybody could gain something from listening to it, whether you've been practicing for 20 years or if you've never practiced Qigong in your life. This interview really showcases how the practice can be a companion throughout life and especially through challenging transitions in life. So settle in, maybe grab some tea, and I hope you enjoy these conversations as much as I did. Hello, welcome, Gideon. Thank you so much for your time and for being here. I felt really inspired to have this conversation today because I know you have a rich background in Qigong and Tai Chi, which I'm really passionate about sharing and practicing. And also from witnessing your personal experience over the last few years of overcoming hardships with resilience. So, thank you for being here. I think everybody is curious to know more about you. I do know that you started practicing maybe Tai Chi as a teenager. Can you tell me more about that, like when you got into this type of practice?
Yes, yes, of course. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to share some of my experience and some of what I've learned. I've been doing it for a while. I tend to think I'm not very good at it, um, but I think that's the mark of someone that's starting to really grasp the bigger picture and understanding that this learning process is actually a lifelong process rather than, oh, I'm going to get it right, and then once I get it right, everything will be good.
Mm.
Um, Instead, it's more of oh, there's many tools, and those tools can help humans to live in a more authentic and therefore easeful way.
Mm.
So
I love that.
when I started at 15. I think the first form I learned, actually, it may have been 14. The first form I learned was 14, and I learned a sword form, a Tai Chi sword form.
Mm.
And at the time, I was out in the desert and really committed to some type of um, minimalist lifestyle. So I was barefoot a lot, and so I practiced the sword barefoot in the desert, which led me to question the value of being barefoot.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
now, of course, with more understanding, I realize, oh, in some situations, it's good to be barefoot. In other situations, it's good to protect your feet. Like at the time, I thought if I found the correct set of fundamentalist principles to stick to, then I could find my way through life. And the more I learned about the Taoist practices, or the practices that come from the same place that the Taoist religion, the Taoist tradition comes from, the more I learn about those, the more it seems that a relative balance is the balance that matters. Like what needs to be balanced in the moment, and how can I do that?
Mm.
Uh, so I started at like 14, and then continued um, through, and then I began to learn some empty hand forms and some kung fu forms for a couple of years. And I didn't have the money to pay my teacher. In fact, most of the time I did not have the money to pay my teachers. What I did in exchange is mostly I would live with them, and take care of household stuff or errands or some, some kind of grunt work or
Wow.
help them treat patients and learn like that.
Hmm.
So I didn't go through formal schooling until a good 4 or 5 years ago.
Wow.
And that was a nice rounding out of things as well.
I bet. I feel like sword form is like the perfect way for a teenage boy to be introduced to these types of practices. I bet that was really exciting.
I felt pretty powerful in
I bet.
in my silly teenage way. And I could tell it was silly because I would go out and like I would try to practice sword on top of a mountain or something, but I would insist on being barefoot. So I would sort of hobble walk my way through cactus and whatnot barefoot up to the top of the mountain and then do this magnificent sword form, feel all hot and
Wow.
amazing. And then sort of hobble down the mountain because I insisted on being barefoot, right?
But you had your moment,
Um,
so it was okay.
I did. I had my moments, but I could tell that there was something like I could tell that I was holding on too hard,
Hmm.
and I still do that.
That's interesting
I
that
still hold on sometimes too much.
even at that young age you had some deeper awareness that you knew you were kind of not listening to. Um, so do you think that that deeper awareness brought you to where you are now?
Yes, yes. I think there's an internal navigation system that is really important to train oneself to listen to. Um, I am not I am not a master of that by any means. I still ignore really obvious messages and then, get in trouble for ignoring them. But I also listen more than I used to, so that's good.
Hmm.
There's more immediate, oh wait, is that is that part of my intuition or part of my my dispersed consciousness saying, "Hey, I can't give you specifics, but don't go over there," or I can't give you a specific reason why, but go talk to that person, or make this laugh or something.
I see what you
And
mean.
those show up occasionally. Yeah.
I feel like, that saying, ignorance is bliss. Like sometimes it almost sucks to be aware of that internal voice. Like you know better sometimes, but you're still like choosing to not listen. Um, but I kind of feel like we just have to laugh at that part of ourselves because I think that is very much a part of being human.
Hmm. Can you explain?
I think we are super hard on ourselves. That's kind of what we're shaped to be in this society and in our culture. So
Hmm.
let's say we're in a situation and our inner voice is telling us to do something different, but we choose not to listen, and then there's a consequence for that, and we beat ourselves up afterwards because we didn't listen, because we're super hard on
Hmm.
ourselves. And I feel like this practice especially has taught me how to be more gentle and lighthearted with my emotions and my experience and just kind of treat things like it is what it is. So I feel like being able to laugh at ourselves is just like a huge tool.
Yes. Yeah, being able, I like that. It is what it is. And then even being able to laugh at it, like being able to laugh in the face of extreme difficulty is a really a good thing to cultivate. I think.
I agree. And sorry, I want to backtrack a little bit because I'm interested in when you mentioned you were living with teachers as like a trade. Was this in California or where was this experience?
Oh, mostly in Asia. So um, I had the good fortune of growing up with a number of people in the adults in the community that my mom was part of. Many of those adults had gone to Asia and lived in India for anywhere from 1 to 18 years, or had started a Chinese medicine clinic before the Nixon era, and then when Nixon opened up a more amenable dialogue between the U.S. and China,
Mm.
then they went over on that first trip. So um, I was lucky in that when I was a teenager, I had a lot of adults that I could talk to that gave me some principles about how to navigate Asia in a way that could help me get what I needed and avoid, tourist surface type interactions that I wasn't interested in. Not that those are, you know, bad
Right, you
in
just wanted
any
those
particular
deeper
way, but
layers.
I did, and so I had a couple of pieces of advice. One was, and these were a bit extreme, so I didn't, follow them 100%. One was don't eat meat, in part because it's safer.
Mm.
There's a lot of hygiene issues in Asian food, is certainly in in food that's cooked in warmer climates, right?
Hmm.
So that particular piece of advice came from my stepfather, who was he was sort of my male role model for the first until I was about 5, 6, maybe.
Mm.
Um, and he had studied with Vinoba, who was a disciple of Gandhi in India. And one of Vinoba's other students um, did this peace walk around the world. And his the, one of Winoba's pieces of advice to that student, which my stepfather also passed to me, was, if you're gonna go places, all over the world, I'll give you two weapons. One was don't eat meat, because I mentioned hygiene before, but meat is also very costly.
Mm.
And because it's costly and because of the general principles of hospitality in Asian culture, if you show up as a stranger, they will give you the very best of whatever they have, and
Mm.
that will be meat, and that's difficult for them to replace.
Mm.
So if you just tell them you don't eat meat, then they won't try to give you that. They can give you other things, and that way you're actually caring for the community in a slightly different way, right? You're making sure that you don't draw from them too much.
Yeah.
And then on the other side was this is Winoba said to his disciple, my stepfather's co-disciple, really,
Hmm.
eat no meat and take no money. Now, I didn't follow that principle, but the idea was don't like when if you want to go out and interact with real people, don't go in a way that you're going from this hotel to this hotel to this hotel. Go from village to village, from house to house,
Mm.
and work in the fields with the people. Right, and that was Winoba's big theme, was really work in the fields with the people.
Mm.
When I was traveling in Asia, I was looking for sort of deep spiritual process. I'm trying to find a better path for human beings, and hoping that I could find um, guides that could lead me a few steps along the way, if not, all of the way, whatever that might mean.
That'd be nice.
Ah, I was hoping for like one guru who would be like the Babaji that would carries me to heaven or something like that.
Yes,
One
please.
path, one perfect method.
Please.
I didn't find those. I found many other things. I didn't eat meat. I often stayed places where they look after spiritual seekers, which isn't something that is part of it's not part of American culture in the same way.
Hmm.
And it's a little bit different in China. I imagine it was different before, but I don't know. But certainly in India and throughout the Hindu cultures, there's this, or Hindu influenced cultures, there is a sense of um, that the highest aim of human life is to figure out, what who you are as a human being and help others also figure that out
Hmm.
for themselves.
That's beautiful.
And in that path, there's a lot of support. There's a lot more support than you would expect. And initially, I think I read the culture um, a little bit incorrectly in that when I went to India and I lived in India for a total of maybe 6, 7 years, something like that.
Hmm.
Um, and I had thought that a lot of the ways in which I was treated, I thought those were about me. I was a teenager at first and in young 20s, and so the expectation,
Everything's about you at
uh,
that age.
everything was about me.
Yeah.
And then years later, I realized, oh my God, it wasn't about me at all.
Hmm.
These are just really kind people
Hmm.
within a culture that supports genuine humanity.
Hmm.
And not that I'm stereotyping all of Asia like that. I really went into specific places and
Yeah.
specific subcultures and niches. So I was really well treated, even as I sort of floundered about as a young seeker.
Thankfully.
Long, long way of getting to your story. So what I would do, one more piece of advice that I got. So I didn't really listen to the carry no money. I rarely ate meat. Um, but I did carry money. That wasn't a thing. And then one of the other pieces of advice I got from a different friend was, if you want to see the real India, anytime you see a non-Indian person, anytime you see a white person, turn around, right? Don't ask questions, just turn 180 degrees and go the other way.
Yes.
And again, I didn't follow that entirely, but I did make it a point to avoid places that were popular on the English speaking circuit. And
Hmm.
often what I would do is I would take a train or a bus to some local place, and then I would ask the villagers, I'm like, okay, where is the local yogi? Often the first 5 or 10 times I asked that, the people didn't know what I was talking about. I had to ask in a slightly different way in each
Hmm.
town. But usually they would point me to some hill or something, and then I'd go up that hill, I'd meet with the yogi, and we would have some interaction. And some of those yogis I stayed with for a good deal of time and learned from. And
Hmm.
others, we just had an interaction, a conversation. Maybe there was some kind of blessing or something, and then I moved on.
Wow. That makes me curious with all the time that you spent in Asia with not just like Taoist masters, but yogis as well. Was there a certain point for you that you felt more drawn to Taoism versus yoga, or do you see them
Hmm.
as equal? Or, I mean, I'm just, for me personally, I got into this practice through yoga and practiced yoga all through my 20s, but I found just for me personally, the deeper layers of Qigong served me better, and that's kind of where my fixation is now.
Hmm. The first, my first round, of sort of that first 5 years or so, was mostly exploring Hindu and Buddhist practices, which are, very, very close to Hindu practices. So my basic frame for that, my early 20s was essentially Samkhya, which is this, it's the worldview that Ayurveda and Buddhism and yoga all essentially agree on, which has to do with the five elements: earth, water, fire, air, and space, and how those relate to the senses, and how karma is uh, produced and released, and this how that relates to disease, and how disease and transcendence are sort of on opposite ends of the human spectrum. You go from disease to wellness to flourishing to transcendence, kind of. And within all that model was on the five elements, and that was my basic frame initially. It's a bit um, it's more rigid than the Taoist approach, and I came to find, certainly by my late 20s and 30s, I used I blended a sort of OCD type perfectionism with the my understanding of the more absolutes of the yogic method, because the
Mm.
yogic method is at its core a renunciate method.
Hmm.
That's why Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita is spending all this time saying, not this renunciation isn't going to work. There are other yogas, Arjuna. And Arjuna's like, wait, what do you mean? I thought this is like an absolute thing.
Mm.
And, Krishna is saying, no, there's more to it than just that. And
Mm.
he needs to say that because the general frame for yoga is absolute, right? I will renounce the world. I'll renounce enjoyment of experience in order to transcend. And um, that's a bit extreme.
Mm.
And my attempts in that direction didn't what they ended up producing was conflict
Mm.
uh, after a certain point. So I went back to my earlier roots and went back to some of the Qigong and Taichi and Kung Fu and trained in that. I came back to the US and I got a doctorate in Qigong and I guess the equivalent of a master's certificate, like a master in Tai Chi and some other internal systems.
Mm. Wow.
And I did a good deal of psychic training as well,
Mm.
because I mean, can we talk about the energetics of that, or
I
is
was
that
gonna
too
ask.
woo-woo?
Yeah, I'm curious.
So one of the things that happened to me while I was in India is I was very naive. I'm still ridiculously naive. I still get myself into all kinds of um, situations where only partway into it realize, wait, is this? Oh, now I understand.
Oh
Oops,
no.
wait, this is not. Yeah, it still happens all the time. Um, so when I was in India, I initially made the assumption that a lot of Westerners still do, that yoga had to do with postures.
Mm.
And so I was doing different postures and expecting, some kind of good things from that. And I was getting good things from that.
Mhm.
But when I would talk to the yogis and renunciates, um, I learned relatively quickly not to mention asana, because if I mentioned asana or postures in that way, the doors of the friendships would immediately close. They would actually they'd look at me and say, "Oh, I didn't realize you're one of those. This conversation is over. You can go talk to, that guy over there. He'll tell you all about whatever." But I've literally just been kicked out of rooms for saying the word asana.
They're like, I'm not gonna waste
Um,
my energy here.
yeah, and that was a bit confusing. Um, and of course, that wasn't all that I was looking for, but I did assume that postures were more central to the Indian experience of Hatha Yoga than was reflected in the culture at the time. And this was, granted, this was 30 years ago, so this was in the early 90s and mid 90s.
Wow.
Um, the environment has changed since, and now postures are all over the place in India.
In India.
So yes, in India,
Mm.
even in India.
Yeah.
Um, so expecting that, what I didn't see was that a lot of the interactions that I had with yogis were on a psychic and energetic level. And I was being tested again and again and again.
Mm.
And in most cases, failing those tests because I didn't even know I was being tested. I didn't
Mm.
even know that was happening. In some cases, I did okay.
Mm.
You could see people's auras and stuff like that. Okay, fine. Um, but there were other cases where psychically I just put myself into many situations where I was vulnerable. And after years of that, I was legitimately injured
Mm.
and on an energetic and psychic level. And I could tell. So I came back here to get other training and balance that out.
How could you tell?
So I could tell I had a good deal of psychic and meditative training as a child.
Hmm.
Um, and I think I just sort of leaned towards that on my own anyway. So I could tell when there were other energies in my field sometimes, not always.
Hmm.
I could tell in some cases, when there were like tears or breaks or something like that.
Mm.
Um, it wasn't super clear. So I sought out clarifying trainings, and the two that really helped me were Qigong and this. I did a whole 2 3 year psychic program that helped a lot, but it was also really frustrating because the principle was it was all third eye. Like it's all from the center of the head. You never do anything viscerally, which
Mm.
is interesting because I was doing that on one hand and then Qigong on the other, which is very visceral.
Hmm.
And between the two, I found a number of ways of kind of rebalancing my system and addressing some of those uh, injuries.
Wow. That's fascinating.
It was a lot.
It sounds like it, but it sounds like such an incredible awareness to have. And when you were explaining it, I was thinking about people who don't have any energetic awareness or any psychic training, and I wonder how they can navigate protecting their aura or creating energetic boundaries.
I think in a lot of cases, um, people interpret this as like stubbornness or a strong constitution or strong will.
Mm.
Um, those qualities can produce a sort of impenetrable barrier. Like, okay, I'm not going to do anything other than the thing that I say I'm going to do or that I'm already doing, whatever that is.
Mm,
Um, and at the same time, when when one is stubborn or very willful like that, it can be difficult to perceive or to perceive what's happening outside of oneself or maybe the impact of one's actions on others. And balancing that sensitivity with the the ability to positively impact the world, but also to positively impact your own being and make sure you're safe.
mm,
That's something that I'm still trying to balance.
mm. I love how deeply you explain things, though. I think that's what makes you such an incredible teacher. And I'm really grateful to learn from you. I know I tell you all the time, but I'm just grateful to have somebody, to have access to somebody with all the different layers and experiences that you had, because I feel like it weaves in really nicely with your teachings for Qigong, Tai Chi, even yoga.
Mm.
It's really beautiful. And also, I think I've been practicing with you. It's been almost a decade, actually,
Yeah, I think it's been about 10 years. Yeah.
which is crazy. I stumbled into your class because it was available at the time that I could go. And I remember hating it so much
I think
because
I remember that as well. Yeah.
yeah, I'm sure I looked like I was having a great time, probably for the first like 5 years or so, or probably even now. I probably just look like I hated it so much. And I did, but it's only because Qigong really has this way of bringing stuff to the surface that maybe got shoved down. So it was just a matter of feeling all of that and processing all of that. And I'm so grateful that I had my internal wisdom that told me, like, hey, you hate this, so probably you should dive into it and see why you hate it so much. And that's
Hmm.
exactly what I needed. I think it's one of the things that's transformed me the most and supported me the most. But with that being said, I've been practicing with you for about 10 years. And so, about 5 years ago, was it? Or 4 years ago, I witnessed you go through an extreme heartbreak and a whole upheaval of your life. And that was really hard to witness as somebody who looks up to you so much and cares about you so much. But what I really admire is that I've been able to witness how you've survived that and how you're here today, like better than ever, I would say. And so I'm so curious if you could tell me more about that time of your life.
Let me back up a little bit before that. And
Sorry.
in that, what helped me the most through that were the set of teachings I received from my last teacher, who was, I think, 100-year-old man, somewhere between 80 and 110. I've seen a couple different dates for him.
Wow.
Um, and he lived in Beijing. I went to see him once a year for the last 10 years of his life. He was Master Duan Zhiliang was his name.
Mm,
And his system was called Wuji Qigong or Wuji Hundun. Qigong, as you know, is a new word. This is a word that's been around about 75 years, and it's basically a catch-all for kind of any Chinese exercise that isn't performative, right?
mm,
That isn't for the sake of someone else. Like dance is for someone else, right? in terms of performance dance.
Right.
Um, and there's a couple other things that are like for show, but any exercise that's for oneself ended up coming under the category of Qigong, which is a very broad category.
Mm.
So after I had gone through my, doctoral training in Qigong and then helped bring another group through their doctorate training, I also helped write textbooks on that. Um, I, I thought I knew what I was doing. And then I met Master Duan, and he didn't answer questions right. When I asked what I thought was straightforward questions, he would just shake his head and get really upset, be quiet for like an hour, and I knew I was in trouble at that point. And then after about an hour, he would say something along the lines of, "Get out of your box. You're in a
Mm.
box." I'm like, okay, I think I already got out of my box, which is, definitely a sign that you're still in whatever box they're talking
I'm
about.
not in a box.
Yeah. Um, so I would ask him things like, okay, this exercise is for the lungs, right? And he'd look at me like I just said something horrible. And and then I'd say, wait, so it's not for the lungs? What's it for? And then it would be even worse. I just kept digging myself into these messes.
Do you think
And
that's like
gradually,
you as a
go ahead.
person, or is that like Western mind thinking, like the way that we've grown up or the way that we've learned to learn?
I think it's a bit of both. But definitely I brought it to the table. Like I wanted to find the right way. And I thought if I asked questions, I could find the correct method.
Mm.
And what there was in this Wuji system, which he ended up passing on to me, is that the correct method is the natural method. Okay, yes, this is Taoist, but the natural method for a human being is a human method, which means ultimately what we're trying to do is figure out how to move like a human
Mm.
and how to live like a human and how to be human, like
Mm.
as fully as we possibly can be. And that includes a great deal of love and care for your community,
Mm.
which for him manifested as his devotion to his community and nation, living a life as a soldier for many decades as he did,
Mm.
and then also his devotion to his community and serving people through his position as a doctor. And he was trained in both of those from a young age in the palace, right? If there was an emperor today, his son or grandson would probably be in one of the inner circles of doctors treating the emperor or something like that,
Mm.
if the tradition had continued from where it was before, because his
Interesting.
grandfather was the emperor's physician, his father was one of the personal bodyguards, and so he was being trained in that same thing. So for him, part of being human was to protect those whom you love and to look after those around you at all costs. And he was also Catholic. And so he said the best example of that is Jesus,
Hmm.
which I didn't have a lot of reference for. Um, in fact, when I first met him, I was on my way to be ordained as a Taoist priest. And one of the things he said to me many times was that Catholicism and Taoism are the same.
Mm.
He didn't say they're similar. He didn't say they agree. He said they are the same. They're the same thing. He grew up that way. Um, when he said that to me, I just shook my head and said, no, no, there's not. And it took me about 5 years to realize for him, they are.
Mm.
And it took me another 5 years until after his passing to realize that it's possible, not only possible, but it's our personal task to bring together the different threads of influence we have into something that makes us more whole. And that something doesn't have to agree or disagree with any previous, with any one of those strands. It's okay
Mm,
to be fully me, even if I'm not Catholic or I'm not, whatever that other thing is. Yeah, I spent a lot of time in Hindu and Buddhist and Taoist traditions. I don't have to reject one in order to embrace elements of another. I don't have to fully embrace one thing in order to somehow or another fix myself. I can
mm,
embrace myself and use the tools to help bring me forward.
mm.
I didn't realize that until the pandemic, which is where your question comes in.
Wow. Yeah.
So a lot of background.
Good
Um,
stuff. Keep going.
just before the pandemic, I had the ground was pulled out from under me. My closest relationships of 20 years suddenly became uh, people that threatened me, like
Mm,
literally threatened my life, from relying on them to, knife at your throat kind of thing. Um, that that broke me. And luckily, the pandemic was taking place, and I was enrolled in UC Berkeley, and the University of California, along with many similarly great organizations, decided to step up to the plate and make sure that every single student was going to be okay. To the extent that they could, they mandated all the teachers and the entire infrastructure reach out to students and make sure that they were going to be um,
taken
going to
care
have
of.
everything they needed to weather the pandemic and the isolation of that. And it just so happened that I was going through other stuff and I really needed those resources,
Mm,
um, in terms of, uh, access to different types of therapy and all kinds of different resources. That made a big difference. And one of the big differences is that I realized that the type of support that was helping people all over the world during the pandemic was very, very closely related to the same things that I was studying and practicing. And as much as I felt like I had kind of lost my way and who I was, and my whole life path had just fallen apart, it was possible to moment engage in a rebalancing activity, in
mm,
rebalancing actions, even if they weren't as grandiose as I had maybe wanted them to be when I was younger. It
mm,
was okay if they were just tiny. And in that, rather than looking for specific accomplishments or specific sort of numbers of days of a set practice routine, like, okay, I've done this now 100,000 times or something. Instead of that, I started to cultivate resilience. I started to look at the way that animals respond, where they're in the moment and then they're engaging with the thing and then they shake it off and then they move on to the next one, or the way that children engage with reality, which is, exploring and trying to figure stuff out. And there's so little judgment in that exploration
mm,
that it provided me with a path out of a very judgment heavy period of time. Whether that judgment was from other people or myself, I'm still not sure. I know that a good deal of it was self judgment still there, but I found that it gets easier and easier to step out kind of from under the thumb of some of these old patterns and into a living, breathing, responsive engagement with experience.
Hmm.
The more I practice, the easier it is to make that shift. And the less I practice, the more I kind of delude myself into thinking it's still easy to make that shift, but gradually the momentum carries me into, deeper into a place where the comfort is illusory. And as far as I can tell, I, my guess is that that never goes away. I think as long as we're alive, there's always going to be um, this this ability to expand and extend and become more fully ourselves, or the opportunity to shut down. And that, when those are in balance, it's a nice yin yang thing. And when they're out of balance, either one of them can be problematic. So resilience then is less about finding some absolute and more about, okay, this is getting too light. Let me anchor it down, right? Or this is getting too heavy. Let me go in and mix it up.
Mm. Wow. I have so many thoughts and questions. I think the biggest thing is kind of what we talked about earlier is like this practice of being kind to ourselves and gentle with ourselves because when you're navigating such a transition, because when we lose somebody and experience like a great deal of heartbreak or grief, like your whole life is changing. And so to navigate through that, it's like really heavy and really murky. And I'm so curious, like, what did your practice look like, especially on those days where you felt really weighed down and like you don't want to do anything? What types of practices held you and supported you in that?
Hmm. Honestly, it was really difficult to practice. There was a period of time where it took all of my effort to get presentable enough to stand upright and go outside to get food.
Mm.
And that was like the entire day was focused on that. Like, and it would be like a half-hour period, and I'd have the whole day focused on that. Um, so there was a lot of floor practice.
Mm.
And when I say floor practice, some people will think immediately of Feldenkrais, and that's exactly right. I did a good deal of Feldenkrais, ATM, awareness through movement,
Mm.
for certainly for 2020, 2021. I didn't have a daily practice, but I had a fairly regular practice of that, which is it's close. It's very, very close to the Taoist practices, but it's more subtle in some ways and relational in that there's very tiny movements and you look for tiny changes across the spectrum of your being.
Wow.
And so I would do that on Sundays, and other days I would do sort of my standing Qigong and Tai Chi practices. And those informed each other. And that was very useful because the ATM, the Feldenkrais approach was very much about well, what do you notice when you move your wrist like this? How does that affect your shoulder? How does that affect your jaw? And it wasn't just once, it'd be a whole 30 or 40-minute practice of just a tiny spinning movement in one arm. And how does that affect the rest of the body?
Mm.
And then I take that into Tai Chi and these other practices. And in that sense, the theme of my practice became very, very fine, very focused on just like one aspect. And if I can get this one aspect to relate a little bit clearer, then good progress has been made,
Mm.
as opposed to um, I'm depressed. I'm going to fix my depression with this exercise. I do the antidepressant exercise, and now I feel better. My practice wasn't at all like that. My practice was, it's still crazy, but I've moved one thing, and that's enough. And that was a game changer.
That's just brings me back to again like the conditioning of what we think strength is, internal strength. Like maybe when we think of strength, we think of, 15-year-old Gideon on top of a mountain with his Tai Chi sword. And really, internal strength is can be very gentle. And it sounds like very simple.
That's that's very much in keeping with my studies with Master Duan. Gentle and simple. He would also get really upset when people would talk about like a long, drawn out healing process with Chinese medicine. He'd
Mhm.
say, no, that's not medicine. Good Chinese medicine, you treat it, and then they know within 24 hours. Usually it's instant, but definitely within 24 hours. If there hasn't been a change within 24 hours, it's the doctor's fault.
Oh.
He was very strict about it. He's like, not a good doctor. And then, he made some caveats. He said, well, sometimes the formula isn't correct, but a good doctor will then account for that and make sure to check on the patient. And if in 24 hours result hasn't been achieved, bring the patient back, different formula. None of this, oh, you should see results in a week or two. He
Mm.
didn't like that. But it was kind of like being hit with a baseball bat, because a lot of the Western ideas of sort of spiritual healing and holistic medicine have this idea of, yeah, oh, it'll take time, which is true. But on the other side, there should also be an immediate shift that you can notice when you're on the right path.
Mm. Do you think, or I guess I'm curious how your interpretation of resilience has changed through this experience?
Hmm. I think resilience is really what there is to be trained. The other stuff is the other methods or ideas end up serving that function to the extent that they're healthy and good for people. Because take take something like weightlifting, for example.
Mm-hmm.
What one is trying to do, well, in an ideal situation, the muscles will stay strong and elastic, not just strong. And it's not that we need to be able to like lift a car or something like that. We need to be able to move in a range of motion that's natural to human beings without being overly tired, um, going about daily activity at a minimum. But remember what I was saying earlier about disease and then well-being and then flourishing, going from sort of imbalances to balance is really nice, but the nature of imbalances in general is for the body is a matter of kind of springiness and resilience. There's so many different systems and subsystems that are nested together in our being that when you pull on one, it affects all the others. And I used to think that if I found the one thing that was the issue, then, and I did some practice for that, then it would solve the whole matrix.
Mm-hmm.
And during the pandemic, the matrix itself became more of the main event. Like how can I care for the the range of experiences and capacities that make up me? And how can, in the process of interacting with others, how can I help them also do that?
Mm.
That became the main frame. And so I started to shift away from being right about my perspective on these practices or even my perspective on the world and into, well, how can I help? And then helping is was then defined by, well, how can I help myself become more fully human? Or how can I help another person become more fully human,
Mm.
like themselves? As opposed to these are the secret exercises that will give you, you know, spiritual power or transcendent power or connects you to the, and that's great. Instead, it's more this looping back of uh, a version of self that is honest and real
Mm.
is a version of self that is connected with the rest of the world, in which the world and the self, the world and me, the world and you, rely on each other. And when I respond to the needs that are there emerging within me, and I respond to the needs that are coming from the outside, then I end up becoming bigger and more, um, I guess more. It's more me, but it's also more human. So the resilience for me comes down to the capacity to be responsive. And then there's another aspect of that, which is the capacity to be responsible, which also includes, you know, cleaning up one's whatever one has to clean up. Like personally, okay, you have your own history, you did that, you didn't do that, whatever. But then there's also, well, what does it mean to be human? There's a lot of us here. It's not it's not easy to take a look at the global, you know, the global situation and be happy about it. And at the same time, it's necessary that we contribute. You know,
Yeah.
how can we help other humans also be more resilient?
Mm.
And I in many ways, I wish there were just like one way. You know, if everybody did this, if everybody became Catholic, for example, then oh, problem solved, everybody be happy.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Unfortunately, yeah, I don't think it's that. Uh, I don't think there is a spiritual version of that, or a yoga version of that, or even a Taoist version of that. And
Yeah.
that's part of the great blessing that I received from Mastered One. And that's really one of the key things that kept me alive during the pandemic is
Wow.
realizing that I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to get even one thing right. All I need to do is be myself and try to move in a direction that helps.
I think we could all use that reminder. And when you were explaining how not one spiritual practice like did this for you, it's just a reminder that no matter how far we think we go into the spiritual world, like, oh, we're so spiritual and we have all these practices and this and that, at the end of the day, we're just a human, and humans have and need very basic things to feel alive and well, like, other human connection, love, kindness, caring for your community. There's all these different things that make us very human, and it's beautiful,
Very beautiful and heartbreaking.
right?
Yeah.
Like, if only,
Yeah.
if only we could become so spiritual, we're protected from heartbreak and loss and grief and all of those yucky emotions.
I don't think that's where it's at though, because in my experience, certainly over the past 5 years, you were framing it, you were asking kind of about my personal practice.
Yeah.
Um, Another aspect of not really my personal practice, but something that I noticed I needed to do in order to be okay was, really to sort of reach out of my bubble and try to help other people.
Mm.
And in the process of doing that, it helped me feel a little bit less alone. Um, and then it helps see that there are many different ways to use a technique or a method. As I'm reaching out and trying to work with this person or that person, and I present something, and then they readjust it into something that works for them. I now see that as like as a victory, where before for some reason I would take it as an affront, some kind of offense if someone didn't do the exercise in the way that I showed them, because I spent all the time trying to learn it and explain it to them, and then there they are not doing it the way I showed them, doing it some other way, um, as if it was like somehow about me. And I'm realizing that it's not. I mean, it is very much about me, but there are many other me's out there, and it's also about those me's,
Mm.
and we're in it together. And I don't think I'll ever really fully comprehend that.
Yeah, and maybe we're not meant to. So,
Yeah.
just to wrap things up here, we've got so much great information. I really enjoyed this conversation and learning more about you. To close our conversation, do you have any words of advice for somebody who is maybe deeply struggling right now? Like, any kind of guidance
Wow.
to help pull them out of a dark place?
Yeah, the first one is reach out, right? Reach out. Talk to somebody. Um, and if the first person you talk to doesn't work, talk to someone else.
Hmm.
If that doesn't work, talk to someone else.
Okay, so you're
You will
saying
find people
reach
that,
out to like therapists, reach out to friend, family, whoever.
yeah, reach out to therapists, reach out to friend, family, reach out to, call the 800 number. Um, yes, all of that. And also, before it gets to that, also reach out. but you in those ways you can reach outside of your bubble. And there's a number of different really great practices for that. Basically, a period of deliberate enjoyment of, and that's different than pleasure, something like that. Deliberate enjoyment, like stopping to take 5 minutes and watch the sunrise, or 5 minutes to listen to the birds or smell the flowers, or stop and to drink a cup of tea and take a little while and try to actually taste the tea. Deliberate engagement in one's experience. And then if you'd like to go deeper than that and you can bring yourself to, if that engagement can turn into an exploration, and the exploration has as its goal sort of an uncovering and balancing of oneself, then that becomes a practice. For example, if you have a cup of tea in the morning, you watch the sunrise, you will notice after several days of this, your body and being start to balance themselves around that practice.
Mm.
Or you could combine a practice like that with a meditative practice, or a practice like that with a basic 5-minute qigong practice or something.
Mm.
So my advice is kind of twofold. One, reach out, and two, create small moments of short periods of deliberate engagement in life. And then you can let those go, and then another 12 hours later find another 5 minutes and just enjoy that, whatever that experience is. Closeness with genuine experience is one of the elements of responsiveness. And then being deliberate about that is another element of responsiveness, deliberately choosing to engage with a certain set of stimuli, or a certain aspect of reality. That deliberateness takes us out of whatever momentum we're in, and the engagement with reality brings us into the present. And that's a very useful practice. And of course, it can end up extending out into a full, like 30-minute or 1 hour personal practice or class. Those are nice as well. But I'm less dogmatic about needing to have, a straight 3 hour practice every day, like
Yeah.
I used to think was an absolute necessity.
Yeah, I think it's more realistic for somebody who is deeply struggling, to even, just 5 minutes or even 3 minutes, and then going back to what we talked about of being kind on yourself and not beating yourself up for maybe you wanted to do 10 minutes, but you could only do five. Like, wow, you did 5 minutes. Congratulate yourself and
Mhm.
make it a practice to just be kind to yourself.
There was a period of about 2 to 3 years where I don't think I was really, there were very few periods of time for longer than 60 seconds where I was okay.
Mm.
Like I would generally, I couldn't do, like you were saying, 5 minutes or maybe 3 minutes. 3 minutes, if someone tried to ask me to do something for 3 minutes, that would have just triggered a full-on breakdown for
Mm.
me, because that would be too much time for me to even comprehend. I was in like that level of trauma, which if someone has been there, they understand that. If one hasn't been there, it doesn't make sense.
Hmm.
And you lucky person that you haven't had to
You don't
experience that,
understand
but it
that, yeah.
is something, it is a place that humans can go. And what I'm trying to get to is, for many years, it was 10 or 20 or 30 seconds at a time.
Hmm.
This 30 seconds, and then the next 30 seconds, and then the next 30 seconds.
Wow.
And gradually that extended further and further and further until um, it becomes a more substantial skill.
Hmm. I know.
And it's a good time in human history to have the skill of being able to take deep breaths, care for oneself, and also acknowledge that things are kind of unpredictable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know that in your eyes, you say you're not a master in this and that, but in my eyes, I look up to you so much and I think you're just a strong teacher and person. And so to hear that you struggled that deeply, it's I don't know if this is a good or bad thing, but it's like validating. It's like, wow, somebody like you can struggle that deeply as well, and it goes back to what you were saying about like this human experience being about us, but also about other people, because other people have those deep experiences as well.
Yeah. People are very deep, very resilient, but also very sensitive. And we have much more impact on each other than um, I think we pretend. I think we pretend that we don't affect the people around us as deeply as we actually do. And I think we also try to pretend that we're not as deeply affected by the people around us as we are. And that's I don't have a conclusion about that. I'm
Well,
just
it's
noticing it.
it's a coping mechanism also because of the structure of our
Hmm.
society. I think it's just kind of like how we have to cope with the way things are right now. But it doesn't mean that we can't be more aware of it. If we have a situation where it's safe to let down our guard a little bit and be a little soft in the moment to, I don't know, maybe the person behind you at the grocery store, like, hey, what? Actually, the other day, this lady asked me why I was buying fennel, and we had a great conversation about fennel. And it was just like some random lady. So that's kind of what I mean. Just like some moments we can soften ourselves and just open to our surroundings. But I also understand having your guard up and just the way that we have to cope with things. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not an easy task to be a human, however wonderful, or difficult one's personal circumstances may be. Internally, it's not easy to be a human being.
Yeah, it's not. And with that being said, I think this is a great place to bookmark this conversation. I think overall, being a human is hard, but having the tools of Qigong, friends, community, art, music, these are all the kinds of things that make it wonderful as well. Thank
Yes.
you again for your time and for your wisdom and just sharing a little bit more about you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for listening. Yeah.
Thank you.